Welcome back, everybody. Every time we do one of these deep dives, I always feel like we're about to uncover some truly fascinating stuff. This one in particular has really piqued my interest because we're going to be exploring a case from the X-Files that always struck me as particularly eerie and thought-provoking Miracle Man.
Oh, Miracle Man, a classic. I remember that one. It's got that unsettling blend of faith and, potential darkness. It definitely stays with you.
Right, and that's exactly why I wanted to revisit it. For those tuning in who might not be as familiar with this particular episode, it originally aired back in March of '94, the 18th episode of the first season.
Yeah, those early seasons had such a raw energy to them. It's fascinating to see how the show's themes and style evolved over time. And Miracle Man really stands out as a unique exploration of, faith, the limits of belief, and the potential for both genuine miracles and, let's just say, less than holy deception.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons Miracle Man resonates so deeply is how it taps into those fundamental human questions about life, death, and what we choose to believe. It also plays on Mulder's personal demons, his unwavering hope for the return of his sister, Samantha, which adds another layer of complexity to the investigation.
Oh, absolutely. That personal connection really adds to the emotional weight of the episode. I mean, it's Mulder's driving force, this profound grief that fuels his relentless pursuit of the truth, no matter how strange or unsettling it might be. And Miracle Man really puts that to the test.
So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the episode itself, let's set the stage for our listeners. As with many X-Files cases, it all starts with a piece of evidence, something that pulls Mulder and Scully into the heart of the mystery. And in this case, it's a videotape, a recording of a religious service led by a faith healer.
Ah, yes, that infamous videotape. But it's not just any run-of-the-mill healing session. There's a twist, a deeply unsettling one. The patient, who appears to be cured, dies shortly after the supposed miracle. And it's this unexplained death that really kicks off the investigation, raising questions about whether there's something more sinister at play.
Right, and that's what makes Miracle Man so compelling from the get-go.
Yeah.
It immediately grabs your attention and makes you wonder, is this genuine faith healing gone wrong? Or is there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? And to fully appreciate how this mystery unfolds, we need to rewind a bit, take a trip back to the origin of the so-called Miracle Man, Samuel Hartley.
Ah, yes, back to 1983. The episode throws us right into the aftermath of a horrific car accident. You know, the kind that really grabs you by the throat and makes you hold your breath. It's a scene of chaos and tragedy, a burnt body being pulled from the wreckage. You immediately feel the weight of the situation.
It's such a powerful opening, and it sets the tone for the entire episode. And amidst this devastation, we're introduced to young Samuel and his father, Calvin. And in a moment that defies all logic, Samuel approaches the body bag, pushes past the bewildered emergency workers, and commands the deceased to rise up and heal. Just imagine witnessing something like that. It sends chills down your spine just thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an entrance. It's such a striking contrast, this young boy amidst all this carnage, seemingly possessing this incredible power. You can't help but wonder where it comes from, what it means, and the reactions of those present are so telling.
Right, the fireman, he's completely skeptical. I mean, who wouldn't be? It goes against everything we understand about life and death. But then there's Calvin, Samuel's father, who's unwavering in his belief. He's convinced that his son has this extraordinary gift, and then, of course, the impossible happens.
The burnt man actually comes back to life, reaches out, and grabs Samuel's hand. It's one of those moments in the X-Files that just sticks with you, you know? It's both beautiful and terrifying, filled with this unsettling mystery. And it's this event, this impossible event, that casts a long shadow over everything that comes after.
10 years pass, and we fast forward to 1993. And it's here that we see Scully presenting Mulder with that videotape we mentioned earlier. The young boy, Samuel, is now a grown man, leading a religious service as part of his father's miracle ministry. And it's during this service that he seemingly heals a woman, Lucy, who's battling a spinal tumor.
And here's where things get really interesting, because Mulder immediately recognizes Reverend Calvin and Samuel. This isn't just another case for him. There's a history there, some prior knowledge, a connection that's hinted at but never fully explained.
Right. Which makes you wonder, what's Mulder's past experience with faith healing? Has he encountered something like this before? It definitely adds to the intrigue. But meanwhile, back in Tennessee, the local authorities are less than thrilled with the miracle ministry. They suspect it's all a scam, an elaborate con designed to exploit people's faith.
Yeah, which is a perfectly reasonable suspicion, to be honest. You've got this charismatic leader, seemingly performing miracles, And people are drawn to that. They want to believe. And unfortunately, there are those who would take advantage of that vulnerability.
Exactly. And their suspicions seem justified when Lucy, the woman who was supposedly healed, dies just 20 minutes after the service. It's no longer just about potential fraud. Now there's a possible homicide to investigate. And despite Scully's initial hesitation about whether this truly falls under the purview of the X-Files, Mulder is all in. He's hooked by the whiff of the extraordinary.
Oh yeah, that's classic Mulder. He sees the possibility of something truly remarkable, something that defies explanation, and he's not going to let a little skepticism deter him. So, off they go to Clarksville, Tennessee, to immerse themselves in the world of the miracle ministry.
And their first stop is to attend one of the ministry's services. And it's there that they meet Leonard Vance, the man Samuel supposedly brought back from the dead 10 years earlier. And let me tell you, Vance's sermon is something else. He's so passionate, so fervent in his belief that it's almost contagious.
Yeah, Vance's testimony adds another layer of complexity to the story. He's living proof, at least according to him, of Samuel's miraculous powers. It makes you wonder if there's any truth to his claims, or if he's just another pawn in a larger game. And speaking of Samuel, his absence during the service is quite conspicuous.
Right. I mean, you'd think he'd be front and center basking in the adulation. But Calvin tells Mulder and Scully that his son has gone missing, vanished without a trace. And that disappearance just adds to the mystery.
Definitely adds to the mystery. And then Sheriff Maurice Daniels enters the picture, providing Mulder and Scully with Lucy Kelly's autopsy report. And it's during this conversation that Daniels mentions other suspicious deaths linked to the ministry, deaths that were never properly investigated due to, shall we say, interference from the ministry itself.
Oh yeah, that's a big red flag. It definitely suggests that they've got something to hide. And of course, Mulder and Scully, driven by their insatiable need for the truth, want to exhume the bodies and see what they can find. But they encounter some pretty fierce resistance.
The ministry's followers, they're deeply devout, completely devoted to Samuel and his father. They see the exhumation as a desecration, a violation of something sacred, and it leads to this very powerful clash between faith and scientific inquiry, a theme that's often at the heart of the X-Files.
It's a really compelling scene because it highlights the strength of their belief. But as this tense standoff is happening, news arrives that Samuel's car has been spotted downtown. And with that new lead, Mulder, Scully, and Sheriff Daniels set off to find him.
And they find him, all right? Not exactly in a place you'd expect a miracle worker to be. They find him in a dingy bar, drunk and bruised. It's a far cry from the charismatic healer they saw on the videotape.
It's such a jarring juxtaposition. You see this guy, the supposed miracle man, in this state of utter despair. And he even confesses, tells Mulder and Scully that he's to blame for what's happened, that his gift has been corrupted by pride and weakness.
But Scully's not buying it. She's skeptical, as always, looking for a more rational explanation. And what's really intriguing is that Samuel then reveals this uncanny knowledge of Mulder's past, specifically the disappearance of his sister Samantha. It's a moment that really hits Mulder hard, triggering those vivid, haunting visions of his missing sibling.
Yeah, it's a powerful scene because it shows how deeply personal this case becomes for Mulder. And despite this revelation, Samuel's still arrested. But things take an even stranger turn during his bail hearing.
Oh yeah, things get biblical. Literally. The courtroom is suddenly swarming with what everyone believes are locusts. It's pure chaos, people screaming, trying to escape this sudden infestation. And Samuel, he sees it as a sign from God, a punishment for his sins.
It's a truly bizarre and unsettling scene. And then, after he's released on bail, Samuel attempts to heal another woman, but instead of a miracle, she dies from what appears to be a seizure. And this second death leads to Samuel's immediate rearrest. But the autopsy reveals something truly shocking.
The woman didn't die from a seizure. She was poisoned with cyanide. And this completely changes the game. It points to deliberate murder, not some accidental consequence of a corrupted gift. And Mulder and Scully, they're not convinced that Samuel's the one responsible.
Right, their investigation into those locusts reveals that they weren't locusts at all, but common grasshoppers. And someone deliberately released them into the courtroom through the ventilation system. It was a staged event, a distraction. And Mulder becomes even more convinced that Samuel's being framed.
Yeah, it's starting to look like there's a much bigger, more sinister plan at play here. But unfortunately, Sheriff Daniels, he's not buying it. He's convinced of Samuel's guilt, and in a horrific act of violence, he allows his men to beat Samuel to death in his cell.
It's a truly brutal and heartbreaking scene, and it seems like that's the end of it. But as we know in the X-Files, things are rarely that simple. Leonard Vance, the man who was supposedly resurrected by Samuel. He starts having these disturbing visions of Samuel, accusing him of betrayal and murder.
Yeah, it's like Samuel's ghost is haunting Vance, driving him to confess. And Vance does confess. He admits that he poisoned those women and that he staged the whole Locust incident. And his motive? It's rooted in bitterness and resentment.
He blames Samuel for his scarred appearance, for the life he's been forced to live after being brought back from the dead. It's a tragic and twisted tale of revenge. And Mulder and Scully, they're able to connect Vance to the grasshoppers used in the courtroom, further solidifying his guilt.
And just when it seems like the case is finally closed, another bombshell drops. Samuel's body disappears from the morgue. Poof. Gone. And there are witnesses who claim to have seen him walking around, still bearing the marks of the beating he received.
It's one of those classic X-Files endings that leaves you with more questions than answers. Was Samuel truly resurrected? Or was it all an elaborate hoax? And who took his body? What was their motive? It's left open to interpretation, which is what makes it so unsettling.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. And to make matters even more complicated, Sheriff Daniels, he's arrested for his role in Samuel's death. The whole thing is just a tangled mess of faith, deception, and violence. And as Mulder and Scully leave Tennessee, the Miracle Ministry shuts down, leaving behind a community shattered by doubt and unanswered questions.
And before they leave, Mulder has one final vision of his sister Samantha, a reminder of his own personal quest for answers, a quest that will continue to drive him throughout the series. And stepping back from the narrative itself, Miracle Man offers some really interesting behind-the-scenes insights into the making of the X-Files.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, do you know that this was Howard Gordon's first solo writing credit for the show? It's always fascinating to see those early works from writers who would go on to have such successful careers.
And Chris Carter, the creator of the show, he was heavily involved in developing the story with Gordon, which isn't surprising given the episode's thematic depth. And apparently, the original script had even more religious imagery, but some of it was toned down for broadcast.
Yeah.
You know, network censors and all that.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And the locations used for filming are always fun to delve into. The town of Clarksville was actually filmed in Steveston, British Columbia, a location they'd used before for another first season episode, Gender Bender.
Resourceful, right?
Very resourceful. And Reverend Hartley's house that was filmed in this grand mansion in Langley, British Columbia. And get this, they used a filled-in swimming pool on the property to set up their equipment. Talk about making the most of what you've got. Oh, and I love this little tidbit. They had a real challenge finding actors who could pull off convincing Southern accents. They even brought in a dialect coach to make sure everyone sounded authentic. And R.W. Goodwin, one of the key producers, he definitely had some humorous anecdotes about those accent struggles.
Apparently, those tent revival scenes were quite the undertaking. They had over 300 extras, and they filmed the whole thing in one very long day. Talk about organized chaos.
And those Southern accents, they were a big source of amusement for R.W. Goodwin. He talked about how they were all over the place, but I guess that's part of the charm, right?
When it first aired, Miracle Man got a pretty decent Nielsen rating, 7.5, which meant over 7 million households tuned in. A solid performance for a show still finding its footing.
The critical reception was a bit mixed, though. Some critics loved Scott Bairstow's performance as Samuel, thought he was really compelling, but others found the plot a bit too familiar, maybe even a little cliched.
Yeah, one critic even said it felt more like a Murder, She Wrote episode than The X-Files. They thought the mystery was a bit too straightforward, not as twisty and surprising as some of the other episodes.
But others argued that the focus on Mulder's personal trauma actually made the killer's identity a bit of a surprise. They were so drawn into Mulder's emotional journey that they didn't see the clues pointing to the real culprit.
And speaking of Mulder's trauma, those visions of Samantha, they're so haunting, and they really drive home the emotional stakes of the case. It's a constant reminder of his loss, and it fuels his unwavering determination to find the truth, even if it means confronting the impossible.
You know, it's interesting to note that Miracle Man was actually adapted into a young adult novel back in 2000. It's a testament to the episode's enduring appeal, how it resonates with different audiences even years later.
And in the grand scheme of the X-Files, Miracle Man marks the first time the show really delves into religious themes. It's an exploration that becomes even more significant as the series progresses, especially in Scully's character arc.
Yeah, you can see the seeds of Scully's own religious background being planted in this episode, even though it's subtle. It foreshadows her later struggles with faith and science, which become a really compelling part of her journey.
And it's worth mentioning that the concept of Samuel Hartley's abilities wasn't entirely pulled out of thin air. The writers drew inspiration from real-life faith healers, people who claim to possess these extraordinary powers. It adds another layer of realism, even though it's still firmly rooted in the realm of the unexplained.
And at its core, Miracle Man really speaks to Mulder's deep grief over losing Samantha. It's this hope, this almost desperate need to believe that somehow the dead can return. And Samuel's apparent resurrection, whether real or fake, it taps into that vulnerability in a really profound way.
And unusually for the X-Files, Miracle Man is one of the few episodes where a case with seemingly supernatural elements is officially closed by the FBI with a rational explanation. It's an interesting choice, considering all the ambiguity and unanswered questions that remain.
Yeah, and you can't ignore all the biblical symbolism woven throughout the episode. From Samuel's name to the themes of resurrection and sacrifice, it's all very deliberate. It adds another layer of meaning, another way to interpret the story.
And apparently, filming in Vancouver wasn't all smooth sailing. They had some unexpectedly cold weather during production, which added to the challenges of shooting those outdoor scenes.
And while Miracle Man might seem like a typical Monster of the Week episode on the surface, it's really more about the conflict between faith and science, belief and skepticism. There's no traditional monster here, just human beings grappling with complex emotions and the potential for both good and evil.
And in the end, the episode leaves you wondering, was Samuel truly gifted? Or was it all an elaborate illusion? And who was responsible for his death and the disappearance of his body? The truth, as always, remains elusive.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Miracle Man, we're left with those lingering questions. Was Samuel's power real? Who took his body and why? And what did those visions of Samantha mean for Mulder?
This episode offers such a fascinating glimpse into the early days of the X-Files, a time when the show was still exploring its boundaries, pushing the limits of belief and skepticism. And it reminds us that personal trauma, like Mulder's grief over Samantha, can have a profound impact on how we interpret the unexplained, how we choose to believe.
And as you continue to ponder the mysteries of Miracle Man, think about this. In a world filled with claims of miracles and extraordinary abilities, how do we discern truth from deception? And what role does faith, both genuine and manipulative, play in shaping our perception of reality?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the X-Files. Until next time, keep those flashlights handy and never stop questioning the unknown.
Keep searching for the truth, no matter where it leads.